السلام عليكم. لا تنسوا الاعجاب بالفيديو والاشتراك في القناة تشجيعا لنا لنستمر بنشر المزيد إن شاء الله.
Upset because people, feel that their way of life is being threatened. Their marriages are not stable, their families are not stable.
Yeah, it is. It's actually a crisis. It's an absolute crisis. Even when it comes to gender roles, gender identity, it's come to a point where the liberals of the liberals even disagree. To which extent do you stop? One identifying themselves as all kinds of stuff, non-binary. So it is heading somewhere where it shouldn't be. But you did say that you said the West. I don't know. Did you say the West or the United Kingdom?
Well, I think the West in general, because the official religion of the West is Christianity.
Yes.
But it was replaced by liberalism.
Yes.
A few centuries ago, and liberalism is itself breaking down.
Yes, exactly. That's what's happening. And you are pro-Sharia to a certain extent, I think. I do want to go into that as well. What we believe is that every human being requires a religion. So now when we talk to the Western world, a lot of the Western world of people who are atheists, they claim they don't believe in a higher being and that they do not follow religion. But I oppose that, because I believe the fact that they're an atheist, every human being, like there was a famous philosopher who said that man is born free but in shackles everywhere. So we believe that everyone has a religion. Even if you're an atheist, that is your religion. So one way or another, you are going to obey some kind of a law and legislation. Either that is God's law or that is not God's law, but it is some form of a law. So where do you think, for example, when the family unit, like I read an interesting book, which I don't know if you've read this before, Claire, it's called Beauty Sick. No. I'm quite obsessed with it. I talk about it a lot, actually. Even my friends are like, come on, you can read another book. But it just talks about how women are made to feel ugly, insecure. To a certain point, there is a woman in here who talks about, feeling so ugly that she would sleep around with men because she felt devalued. But how do you feel that, in general, the family unit is under attack?
Well, in the olden days, the idea of having sex was you would only have sex with somebody you're married to, and now promiscuity. The price of sex is so cheap now.
Yes.
So people think that they can get away with it, but it damages them. It damages their ability to bond with each other, men and women. If you've had lots of partners, you always think there's something better around the corner.
Exactly. Carry on.
And so. With this kind of attitude, you will treat all relationships as, ultimately disposable, and you won't settle down because, in the back of your mind, you think there's something better around the corner. You'll always be discontented with whoever you manage to find.
There are studies that show that people who are in promiscuous marriages and relationships tend to have failed marriages, and like you said before, I believe that having sex outside of marriage and dating is the biggest fraud for females. Yes, men do get affected as well, but if you look at it from a spectrum, is that men are visual creatures. You do not see women going and buying men's magazines to look at men's thighs or legs. You don't do that. But men will do that. Like, for example, you have strip clubs, you have, for example, pornography, you do have magazines and all those kinds of. Men are visual creatures. That's why God Almighty tells us in the Quran that tell the believing men first to lower the gaze. And look, wow, that's actually very powerful. She knows.
I'm telling you.
So why lower the gaze? Because there are more, for example, we're married, There are more handsome men than me and him. And there are more beautiful women than our wives. The point is the following. If we don't lower our gaze, for example, firstly, it shows the respect to the opposite gender. So it doesn't matter how she's dressed, by the way. People have this notion that Islam says if she's dressed inappropriately, you can look at her and mistreat her. But if she's dressed in an abaya, no, excuse me. If she's dressed up in a bikini or in a niqab, I have to lower my gaze, period. And that comes with, like I said before, the heart doesn't desire what the eyes don't see. So if I am too busy looking around, I'm not going to be happy with my wife. I'm too busy looking. Oh, look at her. She's got this. So the thing is here, it starts from Islam deals with it from a micro level to a macro level, because the way it does it, it says the state that we live in, for example, women being objectified, that shouldn't be allowed. having sex before marriage. So it starts from the top to the bottom, and the bottom is what? Lowering the gaze. Yeah. The very top is what fixes society as a whole. Because what happens is a lot of people come and say to me, when it comes to rape, they say, well, girls in abaya get raped or in niqab get raped. We say, well, nobody said that doesn't happen. We're not saying the rapist only targets girls who are dressed up in a certain way. Even in today's, even though you can still say a woman who's dressed up in a modest way, and this doesn't give right to anybody. Rape is rape, regardless who it is. The point is this: we live in a society where corruption is in such a level that these men are indoctrinated to act like animals. So it doesn't even matter now how you dress. Niqab, they have fetishes. You've got pornography, they've got, fetishes. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So in a nutshell, how do you find Islam's point of view, the Sharia, how it deals with the marriage and opposite partners treating each other? What? Because
just before we do that as well, I just want to add something very interesting, because there might be some feminists watching. Yeah. So there's this scholar called John Badger.
Okay.
Who died 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And he has this thing called the gaze.
Okay.
He talks about the gaze.
The male gaze.
The male gaze.
G-A-Z-E, yeah, not G-A-Y-S.
Yeah. The male gaze.
Yes.
And he talks about how Western European art, for example, has looked at females and has painted female in nudity.
Yes.
And the way the painting looks at the female, it's a very male gaze focused perspective. When you look at, for example, I can't think of any images now, but there are these certain Renaissance paintings where the females are very naked, and that's not painted for females. It's painted from the gaze of a man. So I think what Islam really talks about is that very particular gaze, that feminists understood that the male gaze dominates us. And what feminists have tried to do is to hijack, and this is why we have in the 60s like sexual freedom and free love, of like, we own our own bodies, you cannot control us anymore. But to this day, I feel like the male gaze is still very prevalent, hence why we have these issues with social media and all these
the best way to attract male attention is to show off more. Yeah. And I think I forget the name of the YouTuber, but he was saying, these days in societies where women are feeling particularly desperate for the few good men there are, they will show more, more quickly in order to, and they're more prepared to make the move, and that will cheapen them and create a cycle of, women having to work harder to just get a decent man.
What is actually quite interesting, if I may add just quickly, is that I've read this very long study on why young people don't have as much sex anymore as
that's a new phenomenon, by the way. That's a new phenomenon.
One of the reasons is to do because of the easy access to pornography.
Yes.
The easy access to these, like the hookup culture.
Yes.
Just sleeping with someone has sort of distanced us from each other. So this whole talk about freedom came with a price tag, a heavy price tag.
Yeah. And I want to read something to you from this book here. So this woman, her name is Renee Engelin, she done a study. So in this study, she was talking about women who are really if they had the ideal body, how would they feel? So here, this is what she says, I quote, so many researchers have studied what the ideal woman looks like according to our society standards. Take a moment to think about what this cultural ideal woman looks like and describe her. This is what she's asking the participants. Now, please take a moment to imagine that you look just like the woman you just described. Think about the ways in which you would believe your life would be different if you looked like this woman. How would that change? How would that change for you? This is what they said, The response was so upsetting that I considered stopping the study early.
Wow.
One young woman told us that if she could just be beautiful, she would finally be able to focus on her inner abilities and talent. Another said she might genuinely feel happy most of the time instead of just faking it. A different young woman explained that if she could just look the way our culture wants women to look, she would never had an eating disorder, causing stress on everyone around her that loves her but still hurt. Over 70% of women in the study said they'll be treated better by others if they look like the beauty ideal. That is, to me, a pandemic. That is, to me, shocking. And it is unbelievable that in today's time, we have individuals who are capitalizing on Islamophobia and focusing on about women's hijab that are oppressed to wearing the hijab. There is a pandemic of women, millions of them, who feel insecure that in this book I read, they starve themselves. As you may know, in Ramadan we fast from sunrise to sunset.
Yeah.
There are girls in this book that are getting an apple and cutting it to 8 pieces so they can have 1 apple every hour so they don't feel hungry. They are starving themselves. They are not concentrating in their inner abilities by being a human being. And they are too focused on what? How do I look beautiful? And that to me is destroying. And that's the reason why I believe we have a pandemic of mental health problems. Because these women want to have the ideal body, but the ideal body is rigged. It doesn't exist. And it's saddening. I believe that plays a fundamental role. Do you think in women, for example, as a woman, do you not feel like that feels a fundamental role in insecurity, in focusing on the wrong areas where you can be focusing in your career, in yourself, self-motivation, etc.?
Sorry, the question was?
Do you not feel like what the studies show, that women, for example, they are so focused on their beauty, they are neglecting a big part of their life, which is
their
themselves.
personality,
Themselves.
their character.
They're human. They're a human being.
Yes, and you know, it's all distorted and becomes a kind of obsessive compulsive disorder. And also the availability of cosmetic surgery makes, you know, the older woman thinking, well, I've had a boob job,
Yes.
I deserve a better quality of boyfriend, and they
Yes.
don't get it.
Yes.
You know, and they spend thousands of pounds, and, you know, and they still don't get it. And they will end up, you know, bitter and hating men and voting against the interests of men. Because I think fundamentally Western women hate Western men for not staying with them, for not fathering legitimate children with them.
Wow.
And this causes, because what happens is when you have men who are having sex with, there are some men who have sex with hundreds of women. What they don't realize is in these shows, like, you know, like the Jerry Springer show, they have this thing where they realize, they do a DNA test and they find out that these two people who have been in a relationship are brother and sister all along. Because when you have promiscuous relationships, you're sleeping with everyone, and these people don't know that you might have two people who are falling in love with each other who are actually brother and sister. You know,
or something very disturbing. What do you think about the whole red pill community?
that's another extreme.
Like,
You mean men who don't want to have anything to do with women?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's
Never to
another
marry
that's
them.
another extreme.
Well, it's a reaction against feminism, but
Yes.
it's unsustainable because then, you know, if you won't have the next generation.
yeah.
You know?
Claire, what advice would you give to young women, Western young women? And when we say Western, we're talking about Muslim women as well, you know, because at the end of the day, we live in the Western world here, you know. These things do affect the Muslim women as well, you know. We do have the whole trend of, you know, for example, be it hijab being tightened a certain way. And by the way, hijab is for both men and women, you know. We do see men as well, because we need to cover from our navel to our knee. And we do see a lot of men who are, you know, going topless, etc., which is not permissible as well. But we can see, for example, the hijab, like we have females who, sisters, I saw a pandemic, I'll be honest, bruv. I've been observing, I used to go out with my wife, I've seen a lot of girls starting to, the hijab is going like backwards, and I'm thinking, bruv, why? And it's influences as well. What advice would you give to the young girls that are watching this when it comes to getting into a relationship and what impact it has on them in the long run?
What do you mean?
Like what kind of advice would you give them? Like if there's somebody who feels that, you know, they feel insecure,
Forming a resistance against sort of the modern way of like all these
relationships and having intimacy before marriage.
Well, the thing is, you know, you really don't know what to do anymore. The rules are so many, so confusing. It's like, well, in this situation, do this, that's it. And I think most people are confused. You know, relationship advice is, you know, for me, giving advice to a young person, they would say, well, the rules have changed. You know, what worked for you wouldn't work for us. You know, we have to try harder, we have to put out more, and nobody really knows. And that is why it's so important that people know what the rules are. And because, you know, Westerners don't have a religion, there is no such thing as
boundaries.
Expected, respectable behaviour, because everybody has a different view.
Let me reformulate the question, because that's something you may be able to answer based upon the conversations I've heard you have. In terms of like, because you're very pro Sharia, because you feel like there's a lack in sort of like the European subsets of like ethics and morality. How would you basically, someone, and you're agnostic yourself, right? How would you go about promote Sharia, which has such a scary connotation around it, to a modern world, and convince them that, look, you may not believe in these, but I'm telling you, these laws they've been tested over thousands of years and they do work, and they're particularly well suited for our period of time you were in, how would you argue that, or how would you maybe change your perspective? Because I've seen you do that quite well when you talk to people online to advocate for Sharia, and then you give your reasoning behind it.
Well, I think, for Westerners, the concern about immigration, it's like, all these Muslims coming, across the channel. And the thing is, you can use that to say, well, why are they coming? Because nobody here seems able to do any work, because apparently you're not having enough babies, or they're not educated or trained properly, and this is because your government doesn't care about you, and they don't quite dare tell you to, work hard to have more babies, stay together for the sake of the children and bring them up properly, and this is because you have no fault divorce. So, your wives can just say, well, you're boring, you're irritating, I'm off. And then, what happens to the children? So, that is, it's necessary for marriages to be stable, and so I think all divorce has to be fault-based. It can't just be, somebody saying, I don't, want to be with you anymore. I need space to grow, and rubbish like that. And I think just this would help, stabilise marriages, because if we were married and I wanted to divorce, you'd have to say, well, what did I do wrong? Or if you wanted to leave, I mean,
that's very interesting.
إذا أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى الإعجاب والتعليق، ولكي يصلك كل جديد اشترك الآن.